Hi, everybody. All good? Hello, can you hear me at the back? I see everybody's left to go and join hospitality. That's all understood. Really nice to see everyone here. We'll try and keep this short and to the point. We've only got, and I know you're all keen to go and have that large lunch that you had yesterday. I think the Radisson's got us on a dietary regime or something, so we'll do that. I think they believe we're overfed. So our topic today is the one that is up there on the screen. It's a rather long one, and this panel decided that it was actually rather boring, so we thought we'd try and move it on a bit more. And so we've transitioned really into what we're saying is, can East Africa deliver institutional grade real estate? That's how we've transformed that one. So can East Africa deliver institutional grade real estate? Because ultimately we believe that's what global investors, occupiers, lenders, and developers are increasingly asking. I'm joined today, as the MC said, by Graeme Reid, who's the CEO of Tilisi, Shiv Arora, Executive Director of Linden Africa, and in a very colourful shirt, John Latham, who's the Managing Director of Unity Homes. So welcome to the other panelists. To me, Africa has enormous opportunity across all property sectors, but global expectations are changing rapidly. The industry has moved into what they now call it as construction 4.0. I don't know if you see that on the agenda. I had no idea what that meant, so I had to look it up. But apparently it's all about data-driven delivery, ESG compliance, digital reporting, modern methods of construction, transparency, governance, and measurable performance. So today, institutional investors are looking far beyond just attractive returns. Institutional investors want certainty of governance, they want certainty of delivery, they want certainty of quality, and they want certainty around ESG compliance. And ultimately, they want long-term asset performance. That's why they're here. So that creates both an opportunity and a challenge for East Africa, because whilst the region absolutely has the talent, the ambition, the entrepreneurial capability, which we all see, to deliver world-class projects, we also need to be honest about some of the issues we're seeing across parts of the market. And what we're seeing across the market, especially here in Nairobi, is poor quality development, weak planning, over-density, pressure on infrastructure, and in some cases, buildings that simply should not be built and certainly should not have been approved. When you go and have your dietary lunch, just look across towards South Sea and you'll see the dense development there, which is just terrible, in my view. And I think this is because too many developers are focused on short-term return, short-term profitability over long-term value creation. So institutional grade real estate is not simply about building quickly or cheaply, it's about creating assets that are sustainable, investable, resilient, well-governed, and capable of maintaining value over decades. Poor developments do not just damage individual projects, they damage investor confidence, communities, the long-term competitiveness of our cities, and ultimately they damage us. So today's discussion is really about this. What will it take for East Africa to consistently deliver institutional grade real estate? And how do we bridge the gap between international best practice and successful local execution? I'll wrap up soon. Because increasingly investors are no longer simply funding construction, they're funding certainty. So with that, I'll move on to the panel, and I'd like to ask Graeme, first of all, to tell us a little bit about Tilisi, so he can do his pitch, and also, Graeme, what separates a project that gets built from one that remains investable for 20 or 30 years?
Thanks, Simon, but I think you covered it, so. So I'm the CEO of Tilisi, which is about 30 kilometers from here. It's a 400-acre mixed-use, mixed-income master plan development. It's similar in some respects to Tartu City, where Unity is a developer. to Garden City, where Mavida's a developer, to Two Rivers, where Centum's a developer. And at Tilisi, we have two quite large developers, MACE and IHS. IHS, I think, is one of the first institutional investors to invest in residential at Tilisi. We have others who have invested, like ALP, in the logistics park. And part of the reason for it is the fact that what places like Tilisi offer is development certainty. And it comes in various forms. So it comes from the fact that there's a well thought through master plan, and that master plan defines how much bulk is developable, and that defines how much infrastructure is put in there. Some infrastructure is optimized right from the start. And that's what we like to say about Tilisi. It's an infrastructure-first platform. And it's really quite critical for investors, because our main business is selling fully serviced land parcels to developers, third-party developers, to know that that infrastructure is designed to cope with what is going to be built, and that that will be managed. So we won't just allow for Kilimani-style over-densification, and that we actually have in place a program for maintaining that infrastructure. So power is delivered through the Tilisi Power Company, it's a wholly owned subsidiary. Its only drawback is it buys power from Kenya Power. We have a Tilisi Water Company that's responsible for water and waterborne storage, but we take responsibility for maintaining those non-trading engineering services like roads and stormwater drainage and stormwater management. So we provide an infrastructure-first solution, and what that does is it gives credibility to long-term investors that if you're making an investment, the value will be retained over time. And I think that's critical for developments in East Africa, where you provide a platform that is providing the infrastructure first. I always like to say this in these forums. The OEDC study with Afropolis projects that Nairobi by 2050 will be, I don't know how to say this word, a megapolis of 52 million people. That's the current population of Kenya. So not within the same boundaries, stretching out. And infrastructure is quite critical, and I think we need to be talking more, as the engineers in the room have told me, about infrastructure planning. But what you're getting and what gives credibility for investors is, in places like Tilisi, is that that has been thought through and it's been provided, and we give you a plug-and-play solution. And then you said I could do a plug? Just to say that we also have a housing development that we do. It's called Tilisi Views. It's very beautiful. It's in an environment that has wonderful infrastructure, and it's on show in the room over there.
Thanks, Graeme. But it's very true. I think what Graeme says, we're consultants. We do project management, cost management, and we're a global company, and we get clients come to us, developers, and they say, we're in Nairobi. If we're going to build in Nairobi, we want to do an industrial facility. Where would we build it? And of course, the safe answer for us always is a Tilisi, a Tatu, a Northland, somewhere like that, because it has that infrastructure. And so if you're an institutional, international investor, you'd rather go there than going to buy some random bit of land where you're going to have to deal with all sorts of maybe land ownership issues with infrastructure and all those things that Graeme just talked about. So I think quite right, Graeme. So I'll move on to Shiv. Shiv, maybe you can tell us about your new venture, Linden Africa, and maybe the question really is, what scares future investors most about East African real estate?
Thanks, Simon, and really great to be back at EAPI as well. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shiv Arora. I'm the executive director of Linden Africa. We're sort of like 3 months old, so I'm the young one in the group here. Yeah, not for that reason only. But also, we're a residential development platform. We primarily focus on joint ventures with landowners. The investment thesis is pretty simple. There's a lot of landowners in Kenya with vast tracts of land, in some cases even with vast amount of capital. And there's the saying in Nairobi that everyone is a developer, right? So our job is really to bring in capital, bring in development expertise, and do joint ventures with landowners to be able to make projects bankable. Now, what scares investors about East Africa? I think starting on the opportunity side, the opportunity is clear. Positive demographics, a growing population, rapid urbanization, there's infrastructure development. So that's all the good stuff. I think what scares investors about East Africa is exactly what Graeme's sales pitch is on the other side. It's a pretty unpredictable environment. When we do real estate development, and I've been committing capital for 12 years in the country, and investors know that real estate's a difficult asset class. But they know that, look, things can happen, your returns might not be what you set out to be, but at least your operating environment is predictable. And I think that's really the first thing that scares them. What's the tax environment going to be like? What's the land environment going to be like? What's the title environment going to be like? And I think we've unfortunately had some good news in Kenya, but we've also had some bad news. And that's probably the first thing that scares people off. We're currently dealing with some institutional capital that's coming into Linden and going into a couple of projects. And the place where investors are actually spending the most amount of time is alignment with the development partner. What's your execution capability? Can you actually deliver? Are you incentivized to deliver? And I think that having now gone on this journey, it's quite clear that they're actually pretty worried about the fact that, is my development partner on the ground going to execute? Because I think we've all seen nightmare stories of fly-in, fly-out developers that have not done well. The last one I would probably say is operational maintenance. Investors spend a lot of time asking what the development is going to look like when it's completed. Have you thought about your service charge? Have you thought about your development? Have you thought about the look and feel? Have you thought about the rules and regulations, the deed of covenants? Have you paid a lot of attention to that, or are you just focused on the construction sale price? Because the capital appreciation and the maintaining of the yield of a property comes after. So it's why the two gentlemen on my left and right, who are big institutional developers with institutional capital, are in Tilisi and Tatu City, because number one, there's predictability, there's no title issues, and you know what the environment's going to be like. And even if there are changes, at least you're in a way cushioned when you're in these large, well thought out master plan developments. So, yeah.
Fantastic, Shiv. Thank you very much. So it goes back to the theme that we're saying, the safer investment. And if you had listened in on one of the earlier panels with Wayne, he was talking about, where people are looking at government bonds, there's the safer space. But what we also see is that international investors come to Africa to take the higher risk. So if they can see that there is some safe hands around that, they'll come here as well. They won't just come and invest in bonds, they'll actually put money into property as well, in whatever form. So that takes us on to you can see John's the man with the colourful shirt and the big boots. He's come straight from site. So John, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about Unity Homes and from a contractor and developer perspective, because you're both, aren't you? What are the biggest reasons projects fail to achieve international standards?
Yeah, well, thank you. Look, so Unity Homes we've been around now for almost 12 years. And our DNA is, before that, we were actually large-scale infrastructure developers, contractors, sorry. So we came from, I'm a builder by trade, as you probably tell. And we looked at this space and we saw when there wasn't vertical integration, there was often a massive disconnect between what the developer wanted to achieve and what the contractor was producing for the developers. So we've worked very hard to do that from a fully sort of integrated model. I've got maybe two areas I wanted to talk to you about. One was specs. People are often going to China, Turkey, other places in the world, but those are probably the major two destinations, personally for myself anyway. to go and buy things, whether they be tiles, they be kitchens, you name it. Yeah. More and more is coming locally. I must give credit to our industrialists here. Every year we see something which we get the quality and the price we need here. But if you're buying internationally, in fact, if you're buying anywhere, you must understand the specifications. And I often see a massive gap between developer and contractor on that. You know, you'll see in a specification sheet a porcelain tile, 600 by 600. That's not good enough in terms of specification for a porcelain tile. If you actually go to a factory in China, they'll give you about 10 specifications for a porcelain tile. They want to tell you about porosity. They want to tell you, is that tile rectified or not? Is it a vitrified tile? The list goes on. And that's just tiles. Every single item that you're buying from an industrialist, which you're putting into a house, probably has between 5 to 10 specifications, which you do need to understand. You need to understand which ones are important and which ones are not. Some genuinely don't matter. And some of them, if you get them wrong, you're going to be throwing away a container of stuff, or at least selling it on the secondary market to second-grade developers. And that's something I've seen time and time again when I go to developments, you know, because we're really in the details of this. I look at somebody's tiles and I'm like, oh, yeah, he didn't know the specifications for those tiles. And if you see it at an international level, that isn't really there. So if you go into the more developed real estate markets, the idea of these specifications being off whack are much less likely to occur. Often when I go to China, they say, oh, you're in Africa, we've got the specification for you. And I go, no, we don't want those. We want the same specifications as everybody else. And they're trying to help by chiseling that price down. But you need to be very, very careful with that. So that's one area I see in terms of getting that quality up. And the other side, because we're also vertically integrated into design as well, is you can design a house to sell it, right? Or you can design a house to own it. Yeah? And they're very, very different things. If you get yourself in the mindset of, I'm going to own this house once I've finished it, or at least somebody is going to own that house. And we talk about institutional. The biggest institution of house ownership in this country is actually mum and pop investors. It's just small-scale pension funds of you and me and everybody else. Yeah. And people are designing houses to sell them, not for them to own. And this comes down to people cutting corners. If you lower your specs, you lower the quality of your workmanship, you end up with a product which in 10 years' time looks dreadful. So that's a good way to look at whether you're creating institutional quality assets. What do they look like in 10 years' time? What do they look like in 5 years' time? Even 15, 20? If you don't know that today, what do you think it's going to look like in 10 or 15 years' time? I think that would be a really important question that developers should ask themselves, because in the end, we're all selling institutional grade assets, or we should be. Yeah? Okay, that's what I've got.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Really, really interesting. And obviously, you as Unity, you as you say, you get involved in the design and construction. I mean, do you import your own materials from China? Do you actually go there?
Yeah, we're there. In the early days, we were every year. Now we're every 2 years or so, and we have long-term relationships with factories. In the early days, it was hard to get the quantity to go to a factory. You know, if you're a medium-sized project or a small-sized project, you just won't be able to go and talk to a factory, and that means those quality discussions are all the more important, because the guy's selling you what he's got on the shelf. In the case you're not talking to a factory. Yeah, I'd recommend anybody who's interested in that go to. I can't remember. It's in Canton, the Canton Fair. Is a real eye-opener. That there is an enormous industry there. But also, look to Kenya. There are more and more things being made in Kenya at the prices and quality we now need. 12 years ago, I couldn't say that. But today, it was just this week, we saw some kitchens. We're like, ooh. We're there on price and we're there on quality. 10 years ago, we were laughing at our fellow Kenyans, we were looking at their kitchens like, no, this isn't, the pricing's not going to work.
Yeah. So just to finish with you for now, John. So I mean, we talked earlier on about Shiv and Graeme talked about people like IHS who are institutional. So they'll develop and then they will rent. Do you have institutions who buy your product? Do you have people buying 5, 10, 20 units, or is it mom and pop?
Yeah, I would say more like high net worth individuals.
Yep.
So we have a few of those. In terms of institutional money, I think probably the better way to go there is the IHS model, because you've got to capture more of that margin to make it institutional grade return. In the end, what we sell is something which is akin to a government bond, which is inflation protected. I think that's the best way to look at buying property as an individual. You're buying an inflation protected government bond. Now, an institution is going to want a bit more than that.
Yeah,
so they've got to get into the value chain somehow, and hence the IHS model and things like that.
Yeah. And Shiv, just to move. So how do you see that what you'll be developing? Will you be targeting the mom and pop, or will you be targeting the an institutional type buyer?
No, I think ours will be pretty much the same. It will be like high net worth investors and your end buyer and your ultimate homeowner. There is quite a bit of very good product, Unity, Mivida, IHS, Maisha, that's targeting the institutional side on the affordable housing. My bread and butter is sort of your 20 million to 40 million shilling house, not an apartment. That's my selling thesis and has been most of the time, that you can live a little bit outside the city, but you can be able to get a house for the same price that you get an apartment in the city, and you can now commute into your work. So no, not on the institutional scale. Just wanted to add something on the value chain though, because we're seeing it as well. A lot of our procurement is actually moving locally, especially with what's going on in the world at the moment. If you actually go work with some of these manufacturers here and you say, look, I'm going to need sort of 400 toilets, X thousand square meters of tile, and that's my house production schedule, what price are you going to do for me? Let's lock it in today. It also saves your sort of upfront costs in terms of being able to go. I think there's still obviously huge value in going abroad to China and bringing things in, but really just to echo, there has been tremendous growth in the local supply value chain.
Brilliant. And when we as consultants we see the people like British International Investment, some of these guys, and when we move to ESG, you find that that is actually their primary motive now is all about environmental, social, that governance. It's the return is actually almost second on the list. So asking you, Graeme, I mean, if with the ESG viewpoint, I mean, when I talk to somebody like Kavita Doshi, she's passionate about women in construction, and you can see it there. But I would ask you, is the ESG, is it genuinely changing projects in East Africa, or is it just a box-ticking exercise, do you think?
I think it's a yes and a no. So, sorry. When people talk ESG in this country, they talk about EDGE certification. That's kind of like where it goes, and ESG is so much more and so much more important than just the environment. And I think, so at Tilisi, we have, I think, about 1,700 construction workers a day coming into Tilisi. And we have all the contractors report to us on their labor force. And we look at things like, how many people have you employed from the local area? Now, they tend to be the casuals, okay? But this is a start. And how many, what's the percentage of women in your workforce? And last month it was something like 28%, okay, which is not bad. And I think it's because we've asked them or introduced this, and that's a start. But I do think that when we start looking at, we've been talking to the IFC and that sort of thing, and a lot of what they're asking us about ESG is actually about the environment and how we manage the environment, which is critically important. It's very fundamental. But we're not, I don't think you're seeing even from people like the DFIs who are talking ESG, talking enough about governance. How do you engage with, we've got over 500 families living at Tilisi now. How do we engage with those residents in looking at rules and policies and that sort of thing. I don't think there's enough emphasis on that. But the one that I think is absolutely critical for anywhere in Africa is the whole question on the social side of it. So, for example, when we were doing a tender through Knight Frank for security, and you start getting big variances in what people are charging, they then ask, well, what are you paying your guards? Okay, and the minimum wage for guard, I think, is still about 17,000 shillings, but at least you have to check that they're complying with the legislation. Right? And so I think it's going to require a lot more from developers like us to interrogate when you're doing a tender, well, how is your pricing made up, not just in terms of price of steel and a margin, but how do you treat your workforce? So I think there's a long way to go. We're a lot better on environment, but still a long way to go.
Social, yeah. And Shiv, from your perspective on the ESG thing, I mean, if you're raising capital, do you find that the guys you're going to try and raise money from, is it a big question for them?
Yes, but I'm seeing it more on the governance side. It comes back to what John said. What's your development going to look like in 20 years, right? And that comes with your rules and regulations, your deed of covenants, and your maintenance at the start. So actually the discussions we're having, they know sort of what you're doing with the environment. So your sort of sustainability side is have you got solar street lighting? Have you got solar backup? Are you recycling grey water? What are you doing on the social side? How are you paying are you hiring from the local community? Are you enriching sort of local manufacturers and artisans? But the governance side is always big questions, How have you structured your rules and regulations? How have you structured your deed of covenants? What can someone do and what can't they do? And those are the discussions we're having with the owners of capital, because your name's going to be on the door ultimately, and it's becoming more and more prevalent now to focus on the governance side of your development first. Because you've got 500 families living in Tilisi, you've almost got 500 decision makers, all who think that they know better than Graeme, right? But it's how do you interact with them in a way that your development is pretty symbiotic and people are enjoying staying there, and that's where we're seeing a lot of discussions.
Excellent. John, just moving back to you, and I'm sure we'll need to wrap up in a few minutes. Because you are, you're into the detail of your projects clearly, as you say, from design and construction, and you see what else is going on even in Nairobi, and it's to me bizarre, some of it. But the high-rise stuff when you talk in Parklands or South Sea or whatever it might be. But what are your views on the way people design? Are we over-designing projects? Are we, you talk about, I can imagine people getting cheap products out of China, but when you compare your model, which is a low-rise, isn't it? You do what, ground plus one? Or?
We go to
Ground plus four. So you do ground plus four. And
not elevators. Yeah, not elevators.
Not elevators, exactly. So you look at that, and then I mean, what are your thoughts on when you see all these tower blocks going up, apartment blocks going up and around Nairobi?
Yeah, look, there's a space for both. When you look at it, there's a step change in cost the second you start doing multi-deck car parks underneath your buildings, start putting elevators in there, double staircases. If you look at it, let's say you want to live in Westlands and you live in that sort of thing, that's maybe going to cost 30 to 40% extra to build and sell, right? But then you look at it from a young professional's perspective. They're not sitting in a car for 2 hours a day. They maybe don't have to own a car. These are significant costs on their life otherwise. Yeah. So there's space for both. People living in the suburbs are often going there because they want their family to have a slightly more serene and long-term. Excuse me. Have a slightly more serene life on the edge of town, but it's often the transition of somebody's life. And some people, there's medium, professionals who might have one of both. They'll have an apartment in town, which they'll be there 2 or 3 days a week, and then they'll be back with their family in Kiambu or Tilisi at the weekends, yeah? And a mix to it, just like you'd find in the UK, people in the commuter belt of London and people who are going to live right in the centre of town. It's horses for courses, isn't it? I do look at these, there's been a huge growth in developers in the last, I would say the last 2 or 3 years. I specifically noticed there's billboards going up in town. I'm like, who are these people? I look at that and it does remind me a little bit. I think it's 2013, 12. We had a little bit of a bump in the road in the housing market as lots of people dived in. I suspect we might be there at the moment. If any, I'm not sure if that's the question you asked.
No. It's
I'm amazed at the amount of new developers I see.
Yeah, we call it Minnesota money. I think that's what it's referred to. You know?
Definitely some of that.
Yeah. And just to finish off, the last point for you then is are you seeing these Minnesota money projects? Is that affecting your sales?
No, it's not. Somebody asked me about another project that's affecting me. No, our sales every year they get better. I think my advice to all developers is keep your head down, keep on making what you do better. Yeah? Are you going to compete with money laundering from Minnesota? No, you're not. But equally, that money was never for you. Yeah, well, maybe it is. I don't know. So it's somebody in the room. It's just a very different business that those guys are running. Yeah, and I personally, that's not what I'm about. And I don't think you need to compete with it is the answer.
Yeah, you do your product and do it well. Well, that's it for us. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Thanks to the panel.